Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Janice Law. I'm the founder of American Women Writers National Museum. Welcome here today. We appreciate your attendance. American Women Writers National Museum is 3 years old. We don't have a brick and mortar building yet, but we meet in rented space in the National Press Club. And the National Press Club is very nice to give us this wonderful room free because I'm a member of the club, so we appreciate that very much. And if any of you would like to become members of the Press Club, certainly you can do that. Be happy to have you as members. Our mission is to honor American women writers, historical and contemporary. And we've had programs on Willa Cather, Catherine Ann Porter, Emily Dickinson, all of the great American women writers. We're a 501c3, a nonprofit organization. And we have a couple of our board of directors here today. We have Helen Hester Osa and Ann Jones, who are on our board of directors, so we appreciate their attendance today. I'm very honored today that our speaker is Julie Gilbert. Julie Gilbert is the grandniece of Edna Ferber. And as you all know, Edna Ferber won the Pulitzer Prize in 1924, is it, Julie?
26.
26.
I'm sorry, 25.
25, okay. For her book, So Big. And the journey of that novel, So Big, is going to be 1/3 or more or less of Miss Gilbert's presentation today. She's doing a 3-part presentation. The journey of So Big. And the second part will be on Edna Ferber's influence, her novels and her work in general, the influence they had on a youthful America, contrasted with those changed values today. And the third part will be on Ferber's personal relationships with Julie Gilbert and the family members and their general interactions and relationships with each other. Ferber was the author of the movie Giant, of the book Giant, which was turned into a movie, starring Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor and James Dean. Probably everybody has almost probably seen Giant. And she was also, I believe, an author of a Broadway show. Is that right, Julie?
She wrote Showboat.
She wrote Showboat. She wrote Showboat.
The novel Showboat.
And with regard to Julie, Julie's book was nominated for a national. Julie's a playwright, and her book was nominated for a National Book Award in 1979. That was the biography of Edna Ferber. Is this it?
That's it.
This is it. And this is the book that Julie was nominated for a National Book Award. Then in 1995, Julie was also nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for a book called Opposite Attracts. Is that right?
Opposite Attraction.
Opposite Attraction, which is a biography of Eric
Maria Ramar.
And Paula Goddard. So Julie has a very, very distinguished, has followed in distinguished footsteps and has distinguished footsteps of her own. And Rocco Staino, who's the director of the Empire State New York Center for the Book, said he will not forgive me if I don't also mention that Edna Ferber was inducted into the New York State Hall of Fame, the Writers Hall of Fame. So this is for you, Rocco. This is on video. So I'm very proud today to present Julie Gilbert, and her husband Bob is also here today, but he will not be speaking. Thank you. Oh yeah, hi, how are you?
Sorry, I'm late.
Oh, that's all right. Have a seat.
Thank you, Janice. I gather I can be heard. Yes. Okay. Well, I'm very pleased to be here, and I thought I would begin by telling a small story that reveals my great aunt Edna Ferber's earnest patriotism, as well as the way she was often perceived. As many of you might know, she wrote several hit plays with George S. Kaufman, who was a famous wit. He started out as a critic and then became a playwright of great renown. He was also one of the leading members of the Algonquin Round Table, the famous Round Table Circle that was kind of like Bloomsbury. And she enjoyed exchanging sophisticated badinage with him as long as the barbs weren't aimed at her. It was at the rise of World War II, and Ferber was concerned about performing her civic duty. I'm going to try to imitate my great aunt because I knew her and she had a beautiful voice, and she would say, "George, what can I do? I need to do something. I must do something. What can I possibly do?" Kaufman listened patiently to his plaintive collaborator and answered in a dulcet tone, "Well, Edna, you could be a tank." Edna Ferber was a power to be reckoned with. A consistent, dedicated, and best-selling writer for more than 50 years, she was born in Kalamazoo, Michigan on August 15, 1885. She was the youngest daughter of Julia Newman Ferber and Jacob Ferber, who had wanted a boy and were aiming to name him Ed. Little Ed would be the baby brother of their first daughter, the beauteous Fanny. When another girl was born, without the beauteous face, they simply elongated the name to Edna. She celebrated America even though she exposed its shortcomings. Her published work includes 12 novels, 12 collections of short stories, 2 autobiographies, and 9 plays, some of them in collaboration with playwrights other than George S. Kaufman. Ferber's novel, So Big, won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1925. Because I wish to adhere to the presentation you're expecting, I will first talk about how this prize can be manipulated, no matter how illustrious the nominated writer. Contacts are the oldest game in the world. As a reporter, Ferber had covered the 1911 Republican Democratic Convention in Chicago, where she had met and become friendly with the then renowned editor of the Emporia Gazette, William Allen White. He was considerably older than she and married. However, theirs was a lifetime relationship, and she supposedly adored his wife. I wanted just to give you this amazing correspondence which shows how willful somebody in power can be. We're in a city of that, aren't we? And how even though she deserved this prize, still it was political. The year was 1925. It was a prize-winning one for Ferber. The Pulitzer was given to her for her 1924 novel, So Big. It was not quite won on the book's merit alone. There was a go-between, a self-appointed courier who brought affection to business. In the following series of letters, the identity of the do-gooder is revealed as his quest for Ferber's Pulitzer unfolds. December 1924, my dear Mr. Frankenthal, I shall look forward to the books you are sending with interest and check them back to you as soon as possible. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Sincerely, William Allen White. January 1925, my dear Frank, is Edna Ferber's So Big entered in the Pulitzer contest? I'm one of the judges of that contest and have not received the book. I don't need the book. I have read it until I can sing it, but I want to know if it has been formally entered. Sincerely, W.A. White. February 1925. Dear Mr. Frankenthal, is Edna Ferber's So Big on the list of novels entered for the Pulitzer Prize? I don't see it on the list submitted to me. I should certainly think it should go in that first 9 anyway. Sincerely. February 10th. Dear Mr. Frankenthal, I seem to have forgotten the other members of my committee to consider the Pulitzer Novel Prize. I shall be glad to have their names and addresses. Sincerely. After securing Ferber's position on the list and the names of the 2 other members of the jury, White proceeded. Now, because I'm aware of the time that we have, it's a long correspondence, but he is walking her right up to the moment where there are 3 submissions for the Pulitzer, and he manipulates all of these 3 people into picking the second prize. Their second choice would be Ferber, and his first choice is Ferber. Then he manipulates 2 of them to do the first choice. So eventually it got so close that they gave it to Ferber. And then he wrote her this wonderful letter. Dear Edna, as you may or may not know, the judges in the novel contest were Professor O. Firkins, Professor Fletcher, and your obedient servant. You remember last January when I was talking to you, I asked you when So Big was published. I asked it because in looking over the list of the novels submitted, So Big was not listed. I immediately wrote to Doubleday, Page and Company, asking them to submit a copy, which they did, but sent just one copy when they should have sent one to each of the judges. When it came to reading the novels, I wrote to the other judges saying that I was for So Big for my first choice. Firkins had not received it. I bought a copy and sent it to him. Then when it got down to the last three, I was for you. Two other judges were for Balisand and Plumes, and then he goes on to show how this arrived at her. The rating was to be established on the book that got the lowest number of points. I received a letter from the chairman of the judges, Mr. Fletcher, indicating that we could not come to a unanimous decision and suggesting that I agree to Balisand. I wrote him a letter of agreement, and then I appealed from the decision of the judges to the committee which reviews that decision. My appeal won, and So Big was chosen. I'm sending you, very confidential, all the correspondence in the case, thinking you would like to file it with the award. I am so proud and happy over the outcome. I love that he absolutely was so scurrilous in all of this. And that's it. And then he says, I am equally proud of our angel child, of course you, affectionately, Will. So that's how she got her prize. This portion of my presentation is devoted to what made Ferber's work relevant in its time and whether it has lasting power. Because this is such a huge topic worthy of its own course in American literature, I'd like to single out 3 of her novels as examples of having long-lasting effects. I would also like to throw in my 2 cents in saying that I firmly believe my great-aunt was way ahead of her time. She was prescient in understanding and delving into the injustices that came hand in hand with America's separation anxiety from the English motherland. Feeling a new sense of superiority that often comes with independence, we created our own scapegoats, our own underdogs. In her novel, So Big, she focused on misogyny as one of the themes, which she herself encountered many times, as tough a spirit as she was and as wily in business as she was. By 1924, she was already a well-known writer. She had moved her permanent address to New York City from Chicago. She was living on posh Central Park West. She decided that she might not vote that year because of something that had happened upon registering prior to the election. The clerk was taking down the facts about her, name, address, age, etc. When he came to the question of occupation, he didn't even bother to ask her. He simply glanced up and wrote down housewife. Ferber addressed these male assumptions in So Big. The heroine, Selina Peake, endures a similar series of slights when she arrives as a young schoolteacher in High Prairie, an impoverished, patriarchal Illinois Dutch community where she's been hired to teach the children of farmers. When she attempts to join a discussion between 2 men at dinner, she is upbraided for her assertiveness. Now, with every writer, there are always repeats. And Ferber loved this. She loved this scene where the woman tried to get in with her opinions, the educated woman, and she was told to clam it. And this happened again in a very famous scene in Giant. I don't know if you all read the novel or remember the film, where Leslie, played by Elizabeth Taylor, constantly tries to be included in that very, very tight little circle, and they won't let her in. So this, and this obviously disturbed Ferber a great deal, even though I would wager, having known her, I knew her for the first 20 years of my life, everybody let her in. I mean, they just cleared the way, and she would say what she would say her piece. But I think that certainly as she was growing up in a younger America, this was very prevalent. Later, after her heroine, Selena, marries a farmer, she's told that she can't sell the vegetables they grow when she brings a wagon full into downtown Chicago. She can't sell them without a male chaperone. That ain't for womans, she's told. Although Selena is a proto-feminist hero and a character ahead of her time, she's simultaneously pulled back by the trappings of her own era. After all, So Dig was published only 4 years after the 19th Amendment was passed. I guess the question is that although Ferber was iconoclastic, was she revolutionary? When Selena works hard, she is said to work like a man. So Ferber plays it in a way both sides of the fence, in that she wants Selena to be feminine and embraces that in her. So that it's a contradictory character in many ways. She marries, for all of her bohemian spirits and intelligence, she marries a man who is plodding, barely literate. He's a farmer. And she marries him because she swoons with passion at the sight of his strong hands. I quote, "She wanted crazily to touch them. She wanted to feel them about her throat." And when she actually says that her life doesn't count, that she's living it through the men she loves, husband and son, it's said without irony. However, on the plus side of the novel is what Ferber introduces thematically: agriculture versus big business, higher education versus survival. Selena's husband, Purvis, defends himself succinctly when he says, "What good does it do a truck farmer when he knows Constantinople is the capital of Turkey? That doesn't help him raise turnips." The people of High Prairie are too poor to afford the leisure required of an education. They must work tirelessly in the fields, stooped over and miserable until they, quoting Ferber, take on the very look of the rocks and earth among which they toiled. And with all the particles of all of her characters within her, Ferber said, "Though I now live in the city of sophistication, I'll never be more than an onlooker in it. And when it comes to writing, I turn back to the town with a little human awkwardness left in it." Selena's son Dirk becomes a high roller in the business world, handing out brochures to potential investors and saying things like, "You are not dealing with a soulless corporation." Does that sound familiar? And Selena's appalled and saddened. "Dirk, do you know, sometimes I actually think if you'd stayed here on the farm." "Good God, Mother, what for?" "Oh, I don't know. Time to dream." "No, I suppose that isn't true anymore. I suppose the day is past when the genius came from the farm." Given the novel's stark contrast between farmers working to the nub in order not to starve and businessmen earning millions without moving a muscle, one might conclude that Ferber saw the crash coming and understood more than her contemporaries how corrupt the system had become and how unsustainable. After 90 years, So Big has just been published in a new edition by HarperCollins. Obviously, a major publishing house thinks that what it has to say is relevant. One of my mother's favorite sequences in the book was when Selena had just arrived in High Prairie and is met by the head farmhand on the tract where she is to stay and teach. She climbs up into his buggy, and as they jog along through the fields, she points out how beautiful they are, asking, "What is growing here?" He answers, "Cabbages." Whereupon she gushes, "Oh, cabbages. Cabbages are beautiful." Farmhand is incredulous and shakes his head, muttering, "Cabbages is beautiful. Ha, cabbages is beautiful." That became a catchphrase in our household whenever I wanted to get my way. After I proposed a pajama party consisting of 10 noisy jumping girls, "Oh, come on, Mommy, cabbages is beautiful." This might sound somewhat inane, but I think it's more on the profound side. What we perceive to be beautiful. or wonderful simply is so, and initially cannot be spoiled. I find it reassuring that Ferber's philosophy of purity is resurging today, what with farm to table, farmers markets in urban spaces, vegan everything from what's on your plate to what's on your feet, and the notion of the return to nature as is evidenced in the Survivor show, among others, and the muscles on Selena's arms from farming are now sought after as a fashion statement by a populace of young women. And her take, Ferber's take, on the mysteries of attraction never grows stale. Showboat, Ferber's next novel, was published in 1926. Again, and truly, it's worth a subject college, an entire course and a college anywhere. If anyone here has never encountered If anyone here has never encountered either the novel, the Jerome Kern Oscar Hammerstein musical, or the 3 movie versions, please see me after class. The familial and racial themes running through Showboat are as old and seemingly endless as the Mississippi River. The novel has been thought to be reminiscent of poet Walt Whitman's work in that it strives without cynicism to evoke and to celebrate a time, a place, a people, and a culture that is quintessentially American. In this novel, Ferber excavates the human roots of a region's culture, pointing out how lives intersect with and are shaped by the geographical facts of the land. Her women characters are strong, and she traces their significance, achievements, and in the case of the mixed race Julie Laverne, their downfalls through generations. Showboat shares some similarities with Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn in its settings in the small Mississippi river towns in the latter part of the 19th century. However, Ferber's novel is unique in the way it specifically focuses on the spectacle of the floating theater and its effects on both actors and audiences. My first Showboat, I remember I must have been 6 or something, and I was taken to Jones Beach, and I kept saying, why can't we play in the sand? And they said, well, no, this is a production of Showboat. And it was Guy Lombardo conducting, and the Showboat actually came up in the water and anchored, and that was Showboat. And I think it was Andy Devine, I don't know if you remember him, this big portly guy who came off down the gangplank. It was not my favorite Showboat, but it certainly was my first. It was in 1927, only a year after Ferber published the novel, that the musical Showboat was produced on Broadway to wild acclaim. In fact, it's often referred to as the transition from operetta into musical theater. The musical was quite efficient in eclipsing Ferber's novel, although she seemed not to mind and termed it her oil well. For many writers, their underlying rights are sold, and although they can collect royalties, they seldom become and remain rich from one work. Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein were extremely chivalrous. They agreed to make Ferber an equal partner in the coffers of the musical, hence splitting the property 3 ways. This agreement remains to this day. Oh, happy day. Virtually all critical commentary following the musical's first production has been about the musical, the films based on the musical, and subsequent adaptations. The cultural impact of Ferber's work has been considerable, but is mainly based on interpretive adaptations stemming from her novel, rather than the novel itself. I'm just curious, how many people here have read the novel Showboat ever in their lives? Yay, okay. Well, it's a good read, really is. The musical emphasizes and sensationalizes certain elements of the novel, changing if not distorting Ferber's original vision. For example, the themes of feminism and of miscegenation, which were relatively minor in the novel, are magnified in subsequent scripts and screenplays to enhance political currency of the original story. At various times, depending on the version of the musical, the property has been taken to task for some of its Uncle Tom characters, who incidentally do not appear in Ferber's novel. It's important to distinguish the 1926 novel from the more dramatic and at times melodramatic 1927 musical. Please believe me, I'm not knocking the musical, which I feel is one of the enduring and surprising delights of any theatergoer's experience. Can't Help Lovin' Dat Man was the first lullaby ever sung to me by my mother. For me, it will always remain under the title Fish Gotta Swim or Julie's Song, since I was named after the character of Julie in Showboat. And when she sung Bill, I thought it was a nice song about my Uncle Bill. The score of the musical is sacred to me, yet when I finally read the novel at age 10 or 11, I was surprised at how much indigenous history fueled the storytelling. Because Ferber had met with virulent anti-Semitism in her youth in Ottumwa, Iowa, her love of facts and justice stoked her fictional imagination. When she depicts what would be today a cringe-worthy description of black men with rolling eyes and great lips, this was an accurate description of a vaudeville-era tolerance of and for ethnic stereotypes. However, overall, her explorations of American racism are thoughtful and penetrating. Just look at her sympathetic treatment of a mixed-race couple in Showboat, or her understanding grasp of the impoverished and exploited Mexican laborers in her novel Giant. Which brings me to Giant. The musical of Giant was recently presented at New York's Public Theater, and a few critics questioned its length. How can there be a mini Giant? There can't be. The length was the length. A true oxymoron would be a mini Giant. Suffice it to say that Giant was another of Ferber's jewels in the crown. It took her close to a decade to decide it would be part of her canon. She literally corralled it and roped it in after many visits and copious interviews. I feel it's her most lastingly political works because what she said then in 1952 still exists today. The Mexican-American situation has not radically improved. A case in point occurred during the latest iteration of Giant, the musical. The immensely gifted Michael John LaCayusa, who wrote the music and lyrics, and Sybil Pearson, the librettist, who was finely attuned to the source material, included a great deal of spoken and sung Spanish in the piece. A producer was interested in moving Giant to a Broadway house, but one of his caveats was that there was way too much Spanish. The movie of Giant, directed by George Stevens and starring Elizabeth Taylor, Rock Hudson, and James Dean in his final role, is a classic. It is named one of the 100 best films of all time by the American Film Institute. The movie emphasizes the virility of the American West and its manifest destiny as propelled by the ranch owner, Vic Benedict. He fights for and clings on to tradition, keeping the Mexican workers in lowly position of working his land for unequal pay. He is less bigot than a refusenik. This portrayal veers from Ferber's novel. The movie shifts the focus onto Bick, where in the novel it's through Leslie's viewer that we see the intractable past threatening change of any kind. Ferber's heroine is the main character, ready and able to be the modern woman, but held back by the reins of her husband's emotional and literal geography. The story of Giant is as disturbing as it is hugely satisfying. There's a powerful documentary currently available called The Children of Giant. Janice and I were just talking about it. It's a wonderful documentary that kind of cements my point. It's shot in Marfa, Texas, which is where the movie was filmed over half a century ago. The focus of the film is on the Mexican Americans who were extras during the long filming. Many of them are still alive, excuse me, to relive what it was like to have magic visit them and then disappear. It changed the face of their town and for some, their lives. They also remember being treated fairly well, but not as well as the white extras and bit players. Showboat is being ready for an English production at the Sheffield Theatre right now, with hopes of a move to the West End. Giant's now a musical, as well as being under option for a television series. Both of the film versions of So Big are often shown on the TCM channel. These properties seem to be evergreen, which brings me to Ferber's impact on my family. In a word, colossal. For me, for my parents, my aunt, my uncle, cousins, and certainly my grandmother, her sister Fanny. Ferber was born with impact. At the end of my biography, I quote my grandmother Fanny. I have a picture of Edna sitting on Mama's knee, and Mama singing Champagne Charlie at the top of her voice, and Edna reaching up, not towards Mama's face, but up, higher, her palms spread out. It was as though she expected something. A few facts. Ferber's passion for life and work rose out of a childhood fraught with frequent moves from one state to another by her parents' business failures and by the early blindness and death of her Hungarian-born father, Jacob Ferber. She witnessed the bravery of her American-born mother, Julia Ferber, who ran several family dry goods stores, handled the family's finances, and always retained her high-spirited ways. Ferber remembered a 7-year stretch of darkness in Ottumwa, Iowa, where there wasn't a day when she didn't face prejudice. She would walk to school every day, and there'd be a little girl with golden curls sitting on a fence. And every day the little girl would yell, "Sheeny, Sheeny, Sheeny." 25 years later, Ferber was celebrated all over America, and she was a guest at a luncheon. And a very attractive, very polished woman came up to her. "Oh, Miss Ferber, I don't know if you remember me." Ferber said, "Oh, yes, I remember you. You were the little girl who sat on top of a fence, and every day that I was in Ottumwa, Iowa, yelled, 'Sheeny, Sheeny, Sheeny.'" She said it very loud, and the whole luncheon turned around to look. Ferber believed that these were astringent, strengthening years whose adversity had toughened her. At the age of 17, she craved to be an actress, but abandoned her plans to help support her family. As she put it, she always lived the life of a stage-struck nun. There was much made about Ferber's choice to remain unmarried and without a permanent relationship in her life, other than that with her emotionally demanding mother. Just to give a taste of Julia Ferber, I was a toddler, and whenever I saw her, I was to answer to the name Julia, as she believed I'd been named after her. She died when I was 3, so that didn't have to go on for too long. Growing up, all I knew was that my great aunt brought a great deal of excitement, generosity, and pride to our family. I also knew that I never, ever wanted to fall into her disfavor. I saw how this worked when one of the other members crossed her, and it was really rather horrifying. But for me, she was always a fairy godmother who provided me not only with most wonderful gifts, but with my backbone. She's the reason for so much of my life that I've achieved. When I was young, and she would take me for a lunch, very nice lunch, and then a doll at Schwartz's toy store. And then we would go and sit on a bench in Central Park. It didn't matter if it was raining or cold or snowing. We would sit there, and she would say, "Now we're going to imagine." And she taught me how to take a passerby and to invent a story. And so she would say, "Well, what about that man?" And I would say, "What about him?" And she'd say, "Give me something. What was his morning like?" And I'd say, "I don't know, sad." And she'd say, "Why?" And I'd say, "Well, his dog died." And it went on from there, where I would have to come up with the basis of his physical married to my imagination, which I didn't know at the time. I just thought I was pleasing her and coming up with anything I could, but it was the basis of writing fiction, certainly, and even not, of just embellishing And so it was an invaluable lesson. I did want to read you something that she did for me, and it was kind of extraordinary. It's a vague memory, more dreamlike than circumstantial. It was 1955. For a reason unknown, some of the stars of Giant had congregated in New York. There was to be some sort of party or gathering at Ferber's. I was invited along with the adults, a great treat. The day before it was to be, the fever came, and then the spots. I was put to bed, too sick to go, and too feverish to understand that I really couldn't. The bitter facts of the pox didn't actually hit me until my parents left for the evening and the front door slammed shut in finality. I lay in the darkened room with all sorts of empty and full juice glasses around me and cried. The maid came in and turned on the desk lamp. She said that I had a visitor, a Mr. Dean. He must have been right behind her, for he was suddenly in the room, mumbling, "Hi, how are you?" He dragged over the blue desk chair and sat by my bed. He studied my pox. "Bad case," he said. I asked him if he'd ever had them. He shrugged and said that he didn't remember. I told him not to get too close or he might catch them. He shrugged again and said that everybody should have chickenpox at least once in their lives. Then he gave a funny little squawk. It sent me into giggles. He asked how many chickenpox I had. I said I didn't know. You mean you haven't counted them? So he counted the ones on my face. He asked me if I'd read Giant. I said no. I was only 9. He said so. Then he asked me if I liked Ferber. I told him I loved her. He nodded as if in approval and then said, "If you do, you better read her stuff." And then he drank some of my juice and was gone. My great aunt died in 1968. She had been in the early stages of preparing another novel about the plight of the American Indian. She didn't believe in retirement. I know how happy it would have made her if after this presentation we were to go home and order one of her books. Thank you very much. I have 2 copies if anybody's interested at all about them. I could sell them if you want.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
Julie.
you.
We loved it. We loved it. Any questions for Ms. Gilbert? Yes, Kay.
Hi, I'm sorry I missed the beginning. Did you speak at all about her experience as part of the Algonquin Round Table?
No, I didn't.
Did she talk to you about some of those?
No, did my great aunt speak to me about the round table, the Algonquin Round Table? She did not talk to me. She talked to my mother because my mother was part of that world much more than I. So that was really a bygone thing when I was growing up. But I do know that she was quite a star at the table. She and Dorothy Parker were never seated next to each other, not ever.
Did they like
Well,
each
they
other?
didn't. They kind of respected each other a little, but they didn't adore each other. However, they were politically in alignment, very much so. Yes.
The last thing I want to be is anti-feminist, but since you know these properties probably very well, there was a revival, I think, in the 60s of Dinner at 8, and a young actress named Pamela Tiffin, who'd gotten a little exposure in the men's magazine, was in the cast. Do you recall whether that was a successful revival?
I do recall it, actually. Repeating the question, there was a production of Dinner at 8 in, I think it was 1968 or something, and it was on Broadway. It was an all-star cast. They tried very hard to do that. It was directed by Sir Tyrone Guthrie, and one of the stars playing Kitty was a young movie star named Pamela Tiffin, who was very, very pretty and I do remember Ferber saying quite good. She was quite good, which was huge praise. And it had Arlene Francis and all kinds of people. And it wasn't thought to be terrific. It was a success in that even in those days they were smart and did a limited run. So because it had such a starry cast. But Ferber, I really remember because she took me to lunch. I was old enough or precocious enough so she wanted to know what I thought. And we went to a rehearsal and I was to take notes. And she was in a war with Sir Tyrone Guthrie. And she just felt that he was steering it in the wrong direction and not getting the performances out of people that she had in her mind's eye. So I remember it quite well.
I have a question, Julie. In your own writing, how has your aunt generally affected your own writing? You're a published writer and a famous writer yourself.
She affects me every time I write anything. She taught me to see it and say it, not to invent what I didn't see first. So I pictured it and then I reported what I pictured. And that was invaluable, I think, as a writer. So that I was never struggling to word something. It was already that I was just chasing the image and just reporting it. She was a young reporter, a cub reporter, and so she knew the value of pretty much telling it, getting your facts and then embellishing just a little. So yeah, she's very influential on me all the time. Yes.
So based on that, I mean, how did she research like Giant and the oil business back then?
She did.
How did she research Showboat?
Well, she was. Don't forget, at that time it was all very much easier. There were so fewer famous people around that she was really a leading woman writer in America.
So she could talk to anyone.
So she could go anywhere, and she would just put on a hard hat and go and talk to the construction people, and she could do anything and did. She had no encumbrances except for her mother. She didn't have children. She didn't have anything. This was her life. So the red carpet was always out for her. And she would stay in an igloo when she was researching Ice Palace. She stayed at the ranch in Marfa, Texas, Riata, where the Giant is shot. She stayed there. She got to know the family. So she had carte blanche. She did.
Any more questions? Okay, well, Julie, thank you very, very much. We're so Before we conclude, I want to introduce one of our audience members, Kay Cass Stevens. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes? Kay, I know, is one of the stalwart people at the National Gallery of Art. So I'm going to invite Kay to come up for just a minute and tell us like 2 minutes about the National Gallery and what she does there. I don't know your exact title, okay? What is it?
Well, I'm the Deputy Director of Development, so
Okay.
I help raise funds. I hope you all come and visit the National Gallery. It does receive a nice federal appropriation, thank goodness, because that's what keeps the gallery free to the public and open 363 days a year. But that money does not pay for the art or the exhibitions or the conservation or the programs, the education programs. So the money we raise goes to that. But it's a beautiful place, and I hope you all visit. And I might have a few cards, so if anybody wants some, just let me know. But
And aren't you a native Texan?
I am a native Texan. I've been to Marfa twice. Who's been to Marfa twice? Really, not many people. Edna Ferber. It is tiny. I mean, and it's not easy to get to.
No,
either.
but it's a huge art scene.
It's
exploded.
wonderful.
Yes.
It's to be such a small town. town that has so much to do, and yes, lots of art galleries, just little ones, and it's quite fun. So if you all ever feel an adventure, Marfa is a good place to go.
And then there's still Riata, which is a tourist attraction.
It is.
Yeah.
And I stayed in the little hotel where the actors stayed. I stayed in the James Dean room. It was very small, and it's not a luxurious hotel by any means. I looked into the Elizabeth Taylor room. I'm not sure she stayed there the whole time. She might. I think she had a private home maybe somewhere. But anyway, it makes it even more fun to stay there.
What part of Texas is it in? Is it like what?
It's close to the Big Bend, so if you could either go to Odessa or El Paso. You can fly there, and it's about equidistant from there, but it's still a few hours drive to get there. But it's
Is the ranch in the same family? The ranch, is that Riata? Was that the ranch?
That's the ranch.
Still in the
yeah.
same family?
I believe it is. It was, there was a dispute of the way Ferber had depicted some of that family that caused a great furor at that time. And she said that she had, everything on at that time. She didn't even use a tape recorder. She took notes, and it became quite a thing. But the family is still there. I don't think they live in Riata anymore.
Oh.
Because their grandchildren and great
Right, sure.
grandchildren.
Right.
But one of them was in this film, speaking in this Children of Giant.
Oh.
Okay, well, that concludes our program, so I'm sure Miss Gilbert and her husband, Bob, will be glad to stay afterwards and answer questions, or if you're interested in one of her books, please purchase it and come up and meet her, and thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.
Concludes our
Thank you.
program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So much.